3, 2, 1.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Economy, Place, Policy and Scrutiny Committee being held remotely over Zoom. Just to sort of go through the agenda points as they come. I know we have declarations of interest on here first, but I think we should do apologies, etc. So I think we have apologies from Councillor Daubeny, who is being substituted by Councillor Wan, who is very welcome. We are waiting on Councillor Hunter and hoping that she will arrive into the meeting at some point shortly. We come to declarations of interest. Does anybody have anything to declare at the moment? Excellent. To the minutes of the last meeting that are attached in here, I believe it is the minutes of our December Scrutiny Committee. Any comment on that? Not that I can see. Very well. Public participation, we have received no notification of that as far as I can tell. So we move to the update on carbon reduction. I feel I should preface this somewhat. This meeting, as I'm sure committee members will know, has been delayed. I apologise for that. I don't like changing the dates of meetings. I don't think it's good for any member of the public or for any councillors who have other commitments, but it was the express wish of the committee that we had perhaps not been looking as fervently at our environmental remit as perhaps we should have done, and that it was very important that we look at that and that we give the executive member the opportunity to speak and come to this committee and allow us to carry out our legal and statutory duty to scrutinise her. And as such, the initial date of the meeting, we were informed that Councillor Widdowson was unable to make that, and as such we decided to delay the meeting to give her the opportunity to attend. That date was discussed with Councillor Widdowson, it was agreed, and my understanding is that officers have received her apologies. I would personally like to record a frustration that as chair of this committee, the executive member has not seen fit to write or apologise to myself. And I would also say that I think it is not just frustrating, not just disrespectful, but treads on the toes of stopping this committee from doing its statutory duties for her to not attend after being given ample opportunity to do so, and us leaping through far more hoops than we should have done to attempt to allow us to scrutinise the political direction that environment is going under at the moment. So with that preface, I'm afraid, committee, that we have a report and an update on carbon reduction, but as welcome as officers are on this, we will only be able to ask questions of officers on that. I would suggest that perhaps if you have any burning questions for the executive member, if you want to publicly state them here, we can have them written down and submitted to her, and perhaps publish any response that we might receive as a compromise. So we move to this point on the carbon reduction update, and I would ask officers if they would like to present that report. And apologies, officers, for that slightly lengthy and not relevant to your part of the report introduction. So, Sean, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. My name's Sean Gibbons. I'm Head of Carbon Reduction, and I'll be running you through the key points of this update on climate change and carbon reduction. I'm sure everyone's aware that City of York Council declared a climate emergency in 2019 and have subsequently set an ambition for York to be net zero carbon by 2030. We're in the process of putting together the York Climate Change Strategy, and that strategy will set the framework for how the city can deliver on this ambition. In terms of carbon reduction and achieving net zero, we're making good progress. Since 2005, the city and the council's direct emissions have reduced by almost 40%, and the average carbon footprint of a citizen living in York is a third smaller than the UK average. The strategy itself is built on a robust evidence base, which shows that our largest emitting sectors are buildings, both domestic and non-domestic, and the transport sector. An emissions reduction roadmap has been modelled, and that shows a pathway to net zero, which incorporates significant emission reductions over the next 10 years, but also shows a reliance on new technology development, a faster pace of delivery, greater capacity in the supply chain, and a new policy framework at a national level. It will also be a requirement to deploy carbon insetting and offsetting, although that will be a last solution. And we're also required to adapt to an already changing climate. We're already seeing an increase in extreme weather events, and we need to make sure that our city and our citizens are resilient to that changing climate. Our carbon reduction objectives will also produce environmental, social, and financial co-benefits for the city. These will be highlighted in the strategy, and we'll also be providing local case studies and examples of best practice from across the city and our partners. The climate change strategy won't exist in isolation. It's being developed collaboratively alongside the economic development strategy and the health and wellbeing strategy. This gives a holistic strategic framework for the city and underpins our 10-year plan. The climate change strategy is a strategy for the whole city, and it has been developed in consultation with stakeholders. Our big conversation formed the first phase of engagement, and this consisted of resident and business surveys to understand perspectives of climate change. Stakeholder roundtables then provided deeper insight into the opportunities and barriers faced locally by different groups in achieving net zero, and this has helped create the main content for the strategy. The next phase of engagement for our big conversation will launch in the next couple of weeks. This is providing both more breadth and depth to engagement through wide-reaching social media and targeted focus groups to reach underrepresented groups within the city. Looking at the corporate emissions, those that the council is directly responsible for, this accounts for just under 4% of total emissions across the city, showing the impact that we as a council have on York. Heating our buildings and fueling our fleet are the largest contributors to our carbon footprint, but positively we have both a 4-year fleet electrification programme for all vehicles below 3.5 tonnes, and we also developing plans to decarbonise the heating system of our largest corporate buildings. An enormously successful project of the last 12 months has been York Community Woodland. Since securing the land to the west of Knapton in August 2020 with a commitment to plant 50,000 trees, we've entered into a partnership with Forestry England to deliver the community design woodland with significant cost savings for the council and a significant increase in the number of trees that are being planted. The woodland will absorb over 26,000 tonnes of carbon over the next 40 years, increase biodiversity, provide new employment and volunteering opportunities, and create a new amenity green space for the city. There's also significant activity in transport, from the acquisition of 2 new electric refuse trucks, the success of the TIA e-mobility trial, and the ever-expanding EV charging infrastructure across the city. We've also secured significant grant funding over the last 12 months to improve the quality and energy efficiency of homes in the city. This is saving residents energy and money. As a council, we've switched our energy supply, so we now purchase 100% renewable energy, further reducing our corporate carbon footprint. The climate change section of our website's been updated to provide latest information on many of the projects we're delivering, and everyone can stay up to date with the latest news by signing up to our monthly climate change e-newsletter. I'll finish there, but there's additional detail in the annex, and I'm happy to take any questions.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Sean. And just before I come on to questions, just to note that we've had word from Councillor Hunter that unfortunately she's caught up at work and therefore sent her apologies for the rest of the meeting. So we shall come to questions. Councillor Taylor.
Well, thank you, Chair. I didn't think I was going to get in first there. Sean, these are probably comments rather than questions, but if you don't mind commenting on my comments and see where we go from there. Firstly, I'm delighted that so much work has gone into the creation of a York Community Woodland, and I think that will offer many advantages as well as merely carbon sequestration. But I do hope, and maybe you can comment on this, maybe that we're talking further to the Environment Agency about other sites for tree planting upstream of York, which might help to mitigate flooding within the city. And then furthermore, and this, I think this is the elephant in the room, is that figure 1 shows us, figure 1 on page 8, that is, shows us where the emissions are coming from. And paragraph 24 also states that the council's own emissions only account for less than 4% of the problem. So therefore the solutions really have to revolve around partnerships with commerce and with government agencies to address 96% of the problem. So I'll let you come back to us on that if you don't mind, Sean.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, first point on upstream tree planting. Yes, tree planting is an excellent way to alleviate potential flooding issues downstream. I think our flooding officer would be able to give you a more detailed response than I could, but we are looking at numerous planting locations, not just outside of the city. We're also looking to increase urban tree planting, which has lots of benefits as well. We have set a target to increase urban tree canopy cover across the city. It's currently at about 10.8%, I believe. We've set a target to increase it to, I think, 13%, which might not sound a lot, but does equate to planting about 20,000 trees every year. Of course, the woodland is giving us a good head start on that. So yes, tree planting across the whole city, both urban, in a woodland environment and upstream, lots and lots of benefits. Again, a really good observation on the carbon emissions profile and the contribution of the council. Our direct emissions account for less than 4%, so clearly we do need the rest of the city to bring the rest of the city with us on achieving our net zero carbon target. Building strong partnerships, clear communication, lots of engagement to encourage behaviour change will be a big part of that. Of course, the council's influence does extend beyond our direct emissions, so we're also looking at what we can do through our procurement, through the projects that we deliver through the companies and their supply chains to reduce emissions as well. But yes, partnerships and building networks are a big part of what we'll need to do.
Yeah, thank you.
Your follow-up.
Councillor Degon and I worked with Councillor Waller when he was exec member for the environment to obtain grants for householders to insulate their houses, and I think council has done more since those days to encourage that sort of behaviour. We clearly need more of that, both in the commercial sphere and in the residential sphere. And I know that we've done some work with taxi drivers to provide grants to taxi drivers to convert to electric vehicles. I think that's been fairly successful. I don't know whether you have any data on that. But again, it's something that we need to encourage, and for people to be able to charge their electric vehicles when they're visiting York. I know the major project there has been stalled for some time, but it's a good thing and hope it comes to fruition shortly.
Do you have anything to add on those bits, Sean?
No, it's just scrabbling around to try and find the number of new EV charging infrastructure points that we've delivered this year, but I think James might know better than I, but it is a significant number.
I can't remember the number off the top of my head about charging infrastructure, but the Hyperhubs project, we're making good progress with Northern Power Grid on getting those up and running, and that will be a sudden jump in terms of charging infrastructure within the city. Thanks, James. I'll let someone else have a go, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hook.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A lot of my question actually relates to what Councillor Taylor was saying, because when you're a private individual, not a council house owner, renter, you need obviously to improve the carbon efficiency of your own homes. And there's so many sort of scams coming around saying from people, and you never know which ones to believe and which ones don't. And it would be nice to have something that the council can support so that you know that this one is a good one, as opposed to your average scammer who's going to take a lot of money and recommend and give you nothing. So that's what I'm after, really.
Sean, do you have any?
Yeah, I think trusted energy advice for residents is a really important part of this. Most of the emissions that come from our buildings come from the gas consumption for space heating and hot water. So decarbonising our heating systems is critically important, but not just from a carbon perspective. Of course, we've just seen the energy price cap increase announced. It's also really important from a cost perspective, financial perspective as well. And we're working with partners across the city to protect vulnerable customers, but also all residents to reduce energy consumption. We're working very closely with York Community Energy at the moment, who provide an excellent service to households. But lots of the support services at the moment are targeted at low-income households, so we're looking to broaden that offer.
Yeah. So then we'll get some notification of which ones to trust and which ones by implication, because you don't recommend them not to trust.
Yeah, on that specific point, Councillor, I've just had a note drop in that we could potentially work with our Scam Busters team to look at that particular issue and see if we can find the solution to that one.
Thank you. So potentially some work to come out of that. Councillor Douglas.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got a few things that I'd like to ask you about, Sean, and I also understand that likely the first one and most important isn't going to be for you to answer, because if committee members cast your memories back to what we hoped to look at today, it was actually the claim that York Central was going to be net zero, and we wanted to look at what plans there were specifically around York Central on that. And I notice, obviously from your perspective, Sean, I don't think that's within your remit, and we don't have an executive member here to ask about that. But Sean, if you can tell us if there's been any conversations going on around what's being done to achieve that, that would be helpful. So perhaps I'll start there and come back if I may.
Sure. Do you want to? You're on mute still.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor. I think I'm going to struggle to answer that one, I'm afraid.
I can see Tracy has. Do you want to come in quickly, Tracy?
Yeah, sure. The outline planning application for the site, whilst it bakes in some ambitions for higher standards of energy efficiency and sustainability than standard planning policies, doesn't go as far as zero carbon. So it's got BREEAM excellent for its commercial areas, and for the residential areas it exceeds the standard planning permission levels, but it does not go as far as zero carbon. And I can't comment on whatever comments have been made in the past. What I can say is that the council's role within York Central is twofold, well, it's threefold, and I think Tony Clark will be talking to you about the Highways Authority role within it. But we are a very small landowner on York Central, and we're currently developing our own proposition for a housing scheme on York Central, which would be part of our housing delivery programme and would therefore be zero carbon passive housing. We have engaged our architectural consultants, Mikhail Riches, to do a kind of draft scheme feasibility. We're still working on that at the moment. And we are in discussion with the bigger landowners on the site, being Homes England and Network Rail, about how we might seek to develop our land in conjunction with some of their land, so we actually get a scheme that can be zero carbon and can be passive house. And we've had those discussions with the chair and the chief executive of Homes England, and they were both received very positively. And the broader discussions with the partnership, as a member of the York Central Partnership, but not with a kind of controlling interest in it, we have to use our influence to try and achieve the ambition of zero carbon by 2030 on York Central, which has actually been kind of signed up to by the city after the outline planning application was kind of developed and then agreed. So it's a bit of a case of using our influence to increase the ambition of the landowning partners to achieve that ambition. And my conversations with Peter Denton and Peter Freeman on that very subject have been really positive. They were very, very keen to raise the bar on ambition around the sustainability credentials of the whole scheme. The proof of that will be in the pudding, of course, and that needs to be then built into future outline sort of detailed reserved matters planning applications that come in for the actual developments on the site. So there's a lot of work to be done, but that ambition has been articulated to the partnership, and we will continue to work on it.
Thank you, Tracy. Councillor Douglas, I would also just say at this point too, if people have questions for the executive member, if you could save them until after this bit, and then either we shall have a reading out of them, or you can just email them to me directly, and I shall get them collated and sent on. But yeah, Councillor Douglas, back to you.
So just so I'm clear then, Tracy, if you wouldn't mind, at this point in time, there's no official partnership strategy for York Central to be net zero. Is that accurate?
Sorry, the currently agreed strategy is what is submitted as part of the outline plan application. That doesn't actually give you permission to build anything. That will come through the detailed applications, and any increase in the sustainability credentials will need to be secured into those planning applications. So it's an issue which is under it's a matter of conversation at the moment as part of the partnership, but we are not in a position to be able to kind of secure that at the moment, and we will be using our influencing role to try and increase commitment and ambition and bake that in as many ways as we can.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas, do you have anything further?
I do, but they're new questions. So if Councillor Wan wants to go, I'll come in after.
We'll go. Yeah, let's go on, Councillor Wan.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Sean. I'm just looking through the appendix here, and I guess I've seen some of this before because I sit on the Climate Change Committee. On page 23, it gives a sort of timeline, and it shows that we should be about halfway through the phase 2 engagement stage at the moment. Could you just explain to the committee what phase 2 engagement is going to be and how far through it we actually are at the moment?
Yeah, sure. We're actually a little bit behind that timeline, Councillor, and we're just about to launch phase 3 engagement. So phase 1 engagement was the very first, our big conversation, resident and business surveys, taking a snapshot of kind of public perception of climate change and what people would like to see and what they think is important about climate change. Phase 2 for us was the stakeholder roundtables, where we brought in technical experts from industry and partnerships from across the city and really dug down into what are the opportunities, but also what are the barriers locally to delivering on net zero carbon. Phase 3 now takes the content that we've been putting together in the strategy and really we're trying to broaden but also deepen our understanding of public perception. So we're broadening by trying to reach groups that we weren't able to reach in the first round of our big conversation, so targeting minority groups, disabled groups, young people and old people across the city, and a range of other hard to reach audiences, but also drilling down in a lot more detail with some targeted focus groups, both online and in person, to really get a sense of what people think they want prioritized from the strategy, what specific barriers they're facing, how we can overcome those barriers for them, and how we can make sure that the climate change strategy reflects what they want to see for the next 10 years in York. And that process we're hoping will take place through February, March, and then come to an end at the end of March.
Many thanks. That's answered my question.
Just to come in on the table says March 2022 is phase 2 engagement, but yeah, we're behind schedule on phase. Sorry, I'm getting my phrases.
No, it's fine, Councillor. I think it's because we've tried to align the engagement processes across all three, both strategies, so the climate change strategy and the economic development strategy, which are being done at the same time. The economic development strategy grouped together for our phase 1 and phase 2, so that they're calling our phase 3 phase 2. It gets a bit confusing. So we've had 3 phases. The economic strategy have had 2 phases, and sometimes the numbering gets them confused. But we are we're at phase 3. The economic development strategy, we're at phase 2. So number it whichever way you like.
Right. Okay. So phase 2 engagement there is phase 3 engagement for climate, but phase 2 for the economy.
For climate. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Councillor Douglas.
Thanks. So, Sean, I'd like to ask you about the bit you said about our buildings, as in CYC's buildings, and what the plans are for those. Can you outline to us what is going on with that, right from identification through to measures to achieve net zero in them, and where we're at with that, please? Thanks.
Yep, certainly, Councillor. So there is a big opportunity for us to reduce our carbon emissions associated with our public buildings and minimise costs to the public purse. There is quite significant central government funding which is available at the moment under the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and in the UK's net zero strategy published in, I think it was November, they recommitted or reconfirmed another 1 point something billion into that public sector decarbonisation scheme. To be eligible to apply for those grants, we need to develop detailed decarbonisation plans for our public sector buildings. And we're in the process of developing a tender specification for an organisation to support us in developing those decarbonisation plans. Those decarbonisation plans will cover the largest 5 to 10 emitting buildings within our portfolio, and then those plans will form the basis for a bid to the public sector decarbonisation scheme to hopefully acquire grant funding to undertake the upgrades on those buildings. We don't yet know what those upgrades will look like or what those measures will look like, but the decarbonisation plans will give us a clearer picture on that.
Councillor Douglas.
Thanks. So what proportion of our assets is that then, Sean, that will actually be decarbonised in this round?
Well, it's interesting because we're looking to do between 5 and 10 of our own buildings. We have a portfolio of about 200 plus, I think. But actually, if you take the largest 5 to 10 buildings, that accounts for 80% of our emissions. So it's a bit of Pareto efficiency there, that if we take the top 5 emitting buildings, that's a significant chunk of our carbon emissions that we're tackling.
Okay, Councillor Douglas, I've seen you and Councillor Pearson. Councillor Douglas, go on.
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up on that, I suppose what I would say is that in terms of reducing costs as well, it's likely that our far smaller public buildings would benefit really from that as well, wouldn't they? You know, our community centres and smaller libraries, for example. So I would like to think that everybody who or all the buildings within the council assets would be considered and help to move towards that net zero ambition.
That would be an ideal scenario. Of course, we have to prioritise and start somewhere, but we can always take the learnings from this initial process and then roll that out across our wider portfolio and across the city as well. So supporting partner organisations to access grant funding and do decarbonisation plans for their assets as well.
Thank you, Sean. Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, my question, it goes back to the tree planting initiatives and what more we can do there. Because I think one of the things I suppose I noticed walking about my own ward is the number of gardens, for example, that are paved over, and often that's for practical and pragmatic reasons. But I do wonder what more we can do to educate residents about planting of low maintenance, practical trees and shrubs that could help the environment and not be too much for everyone who's leading busy working lives and whatnot. So I just wonder if that's one way for us to tackle like tree planting and tree coverage, would be to actually work with householders who've got gardens, many of whom are perhaps a bit timid or scared of having a tree because they don't want the tree too close to the house and they're worried about the roots and all this kind of. Actually, what more can the council be doing to educate and inform the general public and those people who do have garden space, which could be so valuable in this challenge that we face?
Yeah, that garden space is really valuable, and a quick plug, actually, we recently, I think just last week, ran a tree giveaway for residents of York. We acquired 500 free trees from the Woodland Trust, asked residents to sign up for this, and within the space of a couple of hours, it was clearly the hottest ticket in town. Those 500 were snapped up. It's brilliant to see that kind of reception from our residents, and there's clearly an interest in planting trees alongside the trees. When we do give them out to those who are lucky to get one next week, we will be giving a tree planting and maintenance guide alongside that, and we will publish that I think on our website as well. So if anyone didn't get a tree but wants to plant a tree in their garden, they'll also have access to it. I think what this scheme has shown is that there's definitely an appetite across the residents of York for this type of thing, and it's something that we'll definitely look at doing again next tree planting season. So if we can, in September, October, November later this year, keep an eye out, because might be another opportunity to get a tree if you missed out this time.
Thank you, Sean. I have a quick question. Councillor Douglas, go first, please. Be my guest.
Sorry about that. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
I can.
So I think that this is one for James Gilchrist, to be honest. I was just interested in what the progress of the hyper hubs is, because they have been delayed, haven't they, due to utilities. What's the current time frame on those, James?
Yes. Well, they've yes, we've had some issues between ourselves, a third party, and utility companies, but we hope for those to be on within the next sort of 2 months. They should be powered up and good to go.
That's the answer. Excellent. Fabulous. Councillor Taylor, go on.
Thank you. Sean, I appreciated your reference to Pareto analysis when you were talking about improving 80% of the council estate in terms of buildings. But of course, as I referred to previously, that's only 80% of 4%. And to reach out to private business and private residents is the key. One can imagine that Commerce will be keen to reduce energy usage in their own buildings and energy loss, because they're the ones paying the bills. But what about private rental and private landlords? Because private landlords do not have the same incentive to reduce energy wastage, because they're not the ones paying the bills in the main. It will be the tenants paying the bills. Do we have any specific attempts to persuade private landlords to improve their energy efficiency of their buildings?
Yeah, private rented sector is extremely difficult to crack to keep the economic theory going. It's the misaligned incentives that exist there, that there's no incentive for those in the property to do the tenants to update, because they don't benefit from the extra value that they're adding to the home, and from the landlord's perspective, yeah, they're making improvements where the benefits will be felt, and the reduced energy bills for their tenants. And again, they're not directly benefiting from that. Colleagues in the housing team have received grant funding to increase enforcement of the minimum energy efficiency standards. So all private rented properties need to achieve a minimum energy performance, and the government announced a gradual tightening of that minimum energy efficiency standard. The next change, I think, is 2023, when the standard will raise again. So there are things happening both nationally and locally, and here locally our greatest power is just enforcement around those minimum energy efficiency standards.
I noticed Councillor de Gorme was chipping in something from the chat there, whether we can do more to educate those private landlords and encourage them along the right lines.
Tracy, do you want to come in on this as well?
Yeah, in addition to the minimum energy efficiency standards, want to get your teeth around, we've also in receipt of some grant funding as part of our retrofit program, which applies to private rented sector. It's the thin end of the wedge, really, because the ask is quite big, and that's a relatively small piece of money, but it at least gives us one kind of direction of travel to start chipping away at that one. And the other aspect of that is looking at the broader quality standards in private rented sector through our current consultation on the extension of the licensing system around houses of multiple occupation to incorporate smaller dwellings as well as the larger ones. That will give us a way to be able to drive up quality standards in construction space and the heating, which should contribute. It's not a direct equation of one to the other, but it should help with the improvement of standards, because often the sustainability is just one issue within a building of poor quality living accommodation.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Trace.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tracy. Absolutely echo all of that. James as well. Go on. Everyone's coming on this one.
No, it was just to pick up a point from before, which I should have come in on, but I didn't want the first question to steal Sean's thunder. But the question about tree planting from Councillor Taylor further up the rivers, we have been picked as one of 25 projects nationally to lead on flood innovation and resilience, and received funding from DEFRA. So we're currently doing some modelling work on the Swale, Ure and Nid to identify natural flood risk management things, and obviously tree planting will form a large part of that, and there will be trials and tests as part of that. So that is one of the things we are looking at through that DEFRA funding and that project. I'm
really pleased with that, James. Thank you. It's something I've been banging on about for years. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. If I can come in with my question now, Sean, when we talk about the council for certain electrical stuff buying renewable only energy, what are we talking about there? Are we talking about a grid tariff that is renewable?
Yeah, this is where you get into the nitty gritty of the detail now, Chair.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. We pay for 100% renewable energy. The reality of what we consume, we are at the mercy of the energy mix of National Grid at any given time for when we're consuming that electricity. National Grid doesn't have the capability of siphoning off so that CYC only receives energy that's been produced from a renewable source. So at any one time, we are consuming whatever the energy mix is at that time. But like I said, we pay our energy supplier for 100% renewable electricity. So if every consumer in the country was paying for 100% renewable electricity, there would be an obligation on that supplier to be providing 100% of their energy from renewable sources. But yeah, the devil really does get into the detail there. Hope that's clear.
Yeah, thank you. I guess part of the reason I raised this is that I note that on page 11 and the table on 23, because our street lighting is coming from this grid electricity, it's down as having no carbon emission, which I suppose within that setting it does. And I am just aware that in my ward, Hull Road, we've just had a scheme to install solar street lighting, which we will see its success or not, I'm sure, in the months to come. I'm just aware that we're going to have schemes like this, which are going to have an impact on our consumption of energy and our CO2 emissions, even if those emissions are, a bit of a silo. How do we then take into account and talk about those projects being carbon reducing projects when in reality on the tables and the tonnages of carbon, because we're treating the electricity coming in from the grid as 100% renewable, which it kind of isn't. How do we square that circle?
Fortunately, there is an answer to that, Chair. Anything that reduces total energy consumption is beneficial for carbon reduction measures, because the hardest energy to produce is the one at the top of the spike, the peak of the demand, and that's often where we need to fall back on non-renewable sources, so fossil fuels providing that peak. So purely by reducing total demand, we're having a positive impact on the amount of renewable and the proportion of renewable energy that makes up that energy mix on national grid. And of course, reducing total energy demand also has a positive financial impact. Kilowatts themselves cost money regardless of where they come from, so that's a positive news story as well from these types of schemes.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Are there any further questions for officers in this bit? Not that I can see in that. Thank you very much, Sean, and to James and Tracy for answering questions there and presenting the report. I don't know if there is anything specifically. Right, thank you. Is there anything specifically that councillors wish to ask the executive member for the environment at this moment, which you are welcome to put in writing as well, but if you want to say them out loud, then feel free. Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, I still feel as though we need the executive member to come and tell us what the plan is for York Central, because it appears that she's got more of an idea of this than I think others have, and has been talking about it around the city to various groups, so obviously has a vision and an idea of how she's going to achieve that. So I would like the committee to have the information around that, if we can, please.
Okay, thank you. I would also like to briefly ask her. I note that in this budget we are cutting £100,000. Well, the proposal is to cut £100,000 from climate change, and I think it would have been useful for this committee to talk about what precisely is being cut and what that cut would mean won't happen going forwards. And I don't think it's fair to ask officers that question. So as I said, I shall put that in writing along with anything else that officers, that councillors wish to put in writing to the executive member, and will suggest that we publish the answers as an amendment to the minutes of this meeting. Anything further? No, very well. We shall proceed
Chair.
on. Councillor
Chair, looking at the draft work plan, I wondered, do we have a date when we expect the executive member to address the committee?
If it's all right,
business,
if it's all right, Councillor Taylor, I would suggest we talk about that when we discuss the draft work plan at the end, if that's okay. But I agree with Councillor Douglas's point and your own that we should attempt to reschedule that date. Very well. We move on to 5, the York Central update, specifically on the highways authorities, etc., and climate change impacts. Tony, are you presenting this?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Good evening, councillors. My name's Tony Clark, and I've recently moved role to become the Highway Authority lead for the York Central scheme, with responsibility for the coordination of the highway regulatory functions. The development is now moving into a key delivery phase, with the expectation that the construction of the main elements of the new highway will commence in the summer and be fully complete by early 2025. Owing to the change in the funding arrangements from the original expectation, the main highway infrastructure is now being delivered by Homes England Network Rail, acting as the developer. As a result of this change, the council is now acting as highway authority and will need to ensure that the infrastructure that is proposed to be adopted as highway maintainable at public expense in the future is in accordance with the planning consent, safe in operation, and that the future maintenance and other liabilities are minimised. The Highway Authority also has a duty to coordinate street works being undertaken on the highway and minimise disruption to the travelling public, and to progress any traffic regulation orders or walkway agreements which may be required as a result of the development. The Highway Authority will also advise on the discharge of highway and transport-related planning conditions, such as the Construction Environmental Management Plan, phasing strategy and parking strategy. And the Council's transport team will progress the items covered by the Section 106 agreement to mitigate the impact of the development. And funding for these works and initiatives will be received in tranches as the development progresses, with the delivery programme to match. These interventions, with a total value of approximately £5 million, will include changes to the highway layout away from the immediate site and other sustainable transport measures. So that was a quick run through the regulatory functions which were in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions, obviously.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Tony. Do councillors have any questions on the reports in general, things to elaborate? Councillor Douglas.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Tony, for that. It's really interesting to see how it all fits together. And I suppose, again, I haven't really quite within this report captured what the committee were interested in, and I think it was about transport strategy and around the sustainability element of that and how it would all fit together and integrate into the broader strategy for transport within the city, and what progress was being made along those lines. So I don't know whether you can add anything to that, or perhaps it's a question for Councillor de Gorn as well, if he has anything to say on that element. Thanks.
Yes. Councillor, yes, I suppose the main transport impacts of the development were covered off in the planning application, and the items that are needed as part of that planning consent on the outline planning application, which relates to the travel planning elements, which ties in with the Section 106 agreement I was just talking about, where there are changes to the highway network around the site to make sure that the site itself is as sustainable as possible. So connections to the cycling network, improvements to bus priority provision around the network as well, and also the provision of a travel planning coordinator and travel packs for the residents who come to the new site, providing potentially grants for access to public transport or cycles.
Councillor de Gorn, did you want to comment on this?
Well, I think, as Tony said, the underlying sort of approach to this was set in the outline planning consent, which was, I think, from memory, back in March 2019. Obviously, as Tony's outlined, the approach has changed slightly in the sense that it's now the main development is being led by Homes England and Network Rail as the developers, and we are acting as a highway authority in terms of ensuring that what was required in the outline planning consent is implemented to the standard that we require as a highway authority and in accordance with the outline consent.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas, follow up.
Sorry, yeah, just to follow up on that. Yeah, I'm just looking at the list of items that come under the Section 106 on page 18. Mm-hmm. And sorry, page 42, section 18. And I suppose really what I'm interested in is how does this all fit together, in the sense of we've also got a commercial section to the development. There should be, I would have thought, some aim to try and influence what happens there as far as transport is concerned, usage of public transport versus the private car, the stopping up of Lehman Road and the main road through the site. Is that going to be a through road? The Transport Authority, Highways Authority has the ability to make decisions around that. I'm interested in what the conversations are around how this is all going to fit together and fit into the city's transport network in the immediate vicinity of the site, really. Just looking for updated information on that if we can, please.
Councillor, shall I? Yeah, I'll come in there. Also, there are some really significant changes to the highway network around the York Central site as part of the development, and in particular the new spine road that runs through from Water End, and the change to the Lehman Road tunnel, so that there is a significant improvement for cyclists in that area. So having that as shuttle working and a dedicated cycle route right the way through from Water End right the way through into the city centre there. So there are some major changes that sort of infrastructure changes which will benefit the city across the board. But as part of the planning application and linked to the Section 106 is that there is an additional funding for further measures if the travel plan targets are not met. So the target to achieve a 30% reduction in the trip levels that were predicted for the York Central site off the back of travel planning through the development as it comes into being, and when people are actually occupying the houses and the offices. So that there are a number of measures that will be developed as the development is progressed.
James, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think just in case anybody watching is confused, I think the point I just wanted to get across is that the changes are the changes that were approved in the planning application. There aren't changes beyond that. So the approved planning application about how transport will work has been made. So that the substantive way it will operate in terms of that interaction with the rest of the city, in terms of the bus network, cycle network, the interactions at Lehman Road, those decisions have been made. The additions that Tony talked about are based on the impacts that happen based on the agreed changes. Just for clarity.
Thank you, James. That's useful. Councillor de Gunn, did you want to come in? I know.
Councillor Douglas wants to come back, so shall I see what?
Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I thought that the Highways Authority could make decisions about what kind of traffic travelled down that spine road at which points, and what traffic went through the Lehman Road tunnel, for example. And so that's what I'd like to hear about. Where are we at with decision making around how that road is going to work, and whether it's going to be bus only or whether there's going to be cars going right the way through York Central? That is a decision for the Highways Authority, isn't it? Or please correct me if I'm wrong.
Tony, do you want to come in? But my understanding is that's established as a baseline at the start of the development through the planning application, which the Highway Authority is involved in. Tony, do you want to? Yeah,
I think that's right, James, because the Highway Authority advises the Planning Authority on the application. The decision was taken by members. How the approach, which did include, as I say, significant changes to the way that the highway network would operate. Those changes, the Highway Authority does have the ability in the future to look at the way it's operating. But the consented scheme is what's on the table and will be planned to be delivered.
Councillor de Gunn, do you want to come back on any of that?
Not particularly. I don't know if is Councillor Hook on the same.
Yeah, I was going to say that's all right. We'll move on to Councillor Hook's question if there's no other questions on this bit or comments or remarks. No, Councillor Hook, go for it.
Yeah, I think mine is linked actually, because
Excellent.
I've had a resident's request, because obviously from my side of the city, that's a route that people use to get into the centre of town, because it misses all the bottlenecks that you get along the A59 and everything. And we were led to believe, I thought, that it was going to still be a through route, but people are now saying it might not be. And I never got to see that planning application, so I'm just really help.
Well, I can tell you the detail of what was approved in the outline planning consent, which is what we've been talking about, was for a single line through the tunnel, so that one lane would be taken up for a dedicated cycle lane separate from a pedestrian tunnel. You know, at the moment, obviously, there's quite a narrow pedestrian and cycle tunnel, which is not very attractive for either group of road users. So the change would be for alternate working through that tunnel. So there would still be some access through there, but then in the run up to the planning application, there was some concern about the impact that would have on public transport. So from memory, the design which was approved included some bus priority measures on the spine road, so that buses would, if there was to be a build up of traffic heading for that tunnel, the buses would get priority through there, so making it more attractive for public transport. And officers will correct me if I've got any of that wrong, but that's my memory of what was approved. But I don't think there hasn't been sort of recent discussion, because as you've heard, the assumption has been that the outline approval, which included the sort of projections about travel, the travel plans, all those items which are listed in paragraph 18, were all requirements on the developer to try to reduce the attractiveness of private transport to the site and make sustainable travel more attractive to and within the site.
Anything to add, Tony and James?
I think Councillor Duvall has covered that. That is correct. That the consented scheme does include a through route, but it is restricted with shuttle working at the Lehman Road tunnel.
Okay, does that answer your question, Councillor Hook?
Not quite, because it doesn't tie in with what I was led to believe, so it's unfortunate. So I probably need to talk to someone about it a bit more detail, because obviously coming from way out of the city, public transport's not necessarily the right option, and you certainly can't cycle when you're below a certain level of fitness, so you do need to use your cars.
That's why we have a park and ride service.
If they're open,
to encourage people.
Yeah, but they don't open late enough. You know?
That's obviously what we need to address, isn't it? Not make it easy for more cars to jam up our city. But
okay. But yeah.
Thank you for that, all of you. Councillor Pearson.
Chair, and I hope this is within the remit of the report and the topic. And I must, in my declaration of interest, but I obviously do work for the transport operator of the station. So, but what I'm interested in is what the impact of recent announcements about things like the cancellation of High Speed 2 Phase 2B, i.e. the Eastern Leg, which has had huge repercussions for Sheffield, for Leeds, for parts of the East Midlands, and indeed it was meant to link in just south of York. So I'm just wondering if there's been any thinking so far on what the repercussions of the so-called integrated rail plan means for York Station, and how that impacts on the York Central development, because there's things like the York North project, which Network Rail's working on, and there's always a proposal to build extra platforms at York Station, and that would require reworkings of point work, and that's clearly going to have an impact on the land take of the railway. So I just wondered if there's been any thinking around that, and whether any of the scheme needs to be revised accordingly.
I'm not sure whether I can answer completely on that point, but the changes that we are undertaking for the York Central scheme, it's a consented scheme and did allow for changes at the station itself. So additional platforms if necessary. So the space was left for that to happen, but obviously that may not happen as part of the scheme that's coming forward now. And also there's work at the station frontage which is progressing as well to improve that that interchange as a total improvement for the station area. The connectivity of the York Central development is still, exceptionally good. The East Coast Main Line, access to Leeds and beyond on the Transpennine route is still exceptionally good. So the case for the development remains. Obviously, the improvements would have come from HS2 would have been a benefit on top of that.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, I don't think the immediate impact is on the development at York Central. I don't think it changes that. I think it does pose questions about the integrated rail plan and what the detail in that, what the missing detail in that, I think is probably the right way to phrase it without sounding too political, in terms of what that means for things like East Coast Main Line. So what are the alternatives that have been thought about for places that are losing out on HS2? There's a carrot dangled in terms of what it might mean, but actually that detail isn't there in terms of our connectivity. And I think that's where certainly officers' discussions with DFT have been about what is coming instead in terms of investment into East Coast Main Line, accelerating that investment north of York, which is a conflict point, as many of you will know, in terms of how the station operates.
Thank you. Councillor Gore.
Yeah, just on that, from the Transport for North meeting that I attended, when the announcement was made, there was obviously widespread concern across the whole region about the impact, in particular issues of congestion and freight and delay of work on different sections of the network, how long that will take and how disruptive that will be. So I think that was more the Transpennine East-West routes that were raised as concerns. But in terms of York Central, I think it's also worth stressing the new access and new frontage onto the west side of the station as well. Will very much connect with York Central development, and that will be an additional benefit to the city, as well as station frontage on the existing entrance side.
Thank you. I'm assuming that covers all of your questions and points, Councillor Pearce. Excellent. Are there any more questions on this agenda item? No, not so I can see. Okay, well, in that case, a big thank you to you, Tony, and to James for chipping in with questions for that report. It's very appreciated, and thanks to Councillor de Cohen for being here as well. We shall move on to the next. And as I should have said at the end of the last one, and I do apologise wholeheartedly to Sean for it, if officers have finished their agenda points and wish to leave, then please do feel free to do so and get on with your evenings. We come to item 6, which is the work plan. So we've already had some discussion about this and about how it would be good to fit in, where possible, another discussion on the environment. So we have a forum meeting scheduled in March, which obviously at the moment we don't have a huge amount on that agenda at all. And then we have a public meeting in April, which is our Make It York update, our Q3 finance monitor, and to review the work plan at the moment. I don't know if anybody has any ideas or thoughts at this stage. Councillor Pearson.
I suppose it's a question for the democracy officers really, as to what is thinking around whether there's going to be a restart of like task and finish groups, and whether we can begin that again. Obviously, everything kind of ground to a halt during COVID, and I just wonder how things are getting in terms of gearing back up again.
Yeah, I think that would be a question best addressed to Dawn Steele. She's the statutory scrutiny officer, possibly Janie Berry, our head of governance, but I can certainly ask the question on behalf of the committee.
Yeah, that would be really good, because I think, yeah, there's a few things that we've been talking about where actually scrutiny could really help with,
Yep.
you know, decision making and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can feed that back to them.
No, I think that's a good point. I appreciate though how much pressure that democratic services have been under in the past year. Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, just looking at what we've got listed for the forum meeting. I wonder if that should focus on major projects, because we haven't looked at those for some time, have we? And I know, for example, Guildhall has had some issues recently. So it'd be good to hear what that's like by March, I think. Don't know what anybody else thinks to that.
I'd look to officers. Is that a major issue if we were to suggest that as a point? I know, appreciate that it's not a huge amount of time away. Is my only thought. Tracy.
Sorry, my phone's going wild.
Perfectly all right. Don't worry.
On the Guildhall, it should be open by the time you're receiving this. Someone really wants to talk to me. Sorry.
Right.
Sorry, the Guildhall should be handed over to us and in transition on its way over to hand over to the Leeds University by the time of your next meeting, I think. We could therefore be bringing you a very brief update report. I wouldn't want to divert too much officer time into writing an extensive report, because I'd rather be concentrating on the finalisation of the project. It may be better that we could do that better later in the year when we've actually made the transition and we are through that particular gate. I don't think there's any advantage to having it at the next point. You'll have a clearer picture when we've actually finished the project.
Councillor Douglas, I'll come to you in a minute. Just briefly thinking, could it? I'm aware that it is a forum meeting, not a public meeting. Could it be acceptable, perhaps, to have a verbal update and questions at that meeting?
Yeah,
rather than perhaps a formal written report. Councillor Douglas, I don't know if you have any feelings.
Yeah, and I think the Guildhall isn't the only one, is it? It would be one amongst the 3 or so that are currently ongoing, that I think it is time that committee had an update on them, and verbal would be fine by me.
Sorry, so which ones were you wanting to cover then? You've done York Central tonight, and I hope
covered York Central. Sorry.
Castle Gateway, Guildhall. Yep. Anybody else for any others?
Councillor Pearson.
Sorry.
On Councillor Pearson.
It would be interesting to know about the York Station frontage project, because obviously I think that's meant to start very soon. But yeah, it's quite exciting, and I would be interested in knowing about that.
Thank you. That seems
sorry, that's one of James, not mine.
Sufficient to be getting on with, perhaps, I would suggest, within that. And then I note our April meeting. We have an update from Make It York, which I think would be a timely and useful agenda item. We've got our Q3 finance monitor. I would suggest that, having had a reasonably comprehensive discussion with officers in today's meeting about the environment, that perhaps we invite Councillor Widdowson for the April have a discussion of the political direction of environment and climate change at that meeting. And I think I will stretch my usual thing and have three agenda items there. Councillor Douglas.
And can you ask her to come ready to speak about her plans for net zero on York Central as well, please? Thanks.
Okay, we can add that in. Sure. And then we have in our items for future meetings, which I suspect will be bounced into the new year, financially speaking and planning speaking. We have an update on car parking, and we've been asked to talk to couriers. And we've also had some notes from CSMC and our joint commissioned meeting about accessibility and traffic regulation, which I think that point is the same as the couriers point in the items for future meetings. The development of the public realm to deliver different types of behaviour, and an update on the civic trust work on 9 cities with Andrew Morrison.
Is the couriers thing a discussion that would perhaps be best dealt with as a forum meeting?
Yeah, I could see that working well. As I think that's a good suggestion, Councillor Taylor. Thank you. Yeah, so a good opportunity to get into the discussion behind closed doors potentially. Are there any other points arising or that you've thought of that you would like discussed in a future meeting?
What about extension of park and rides? I mean, I can see there's discussion going on in the chat between Councillor de Gaulle.
Park and ride, yes.
But I mean, it is something. When I worked in the arts, it was an issue for some customers who lived on the outskirts who could not get a bus back home after a theatre or a cinema performance. So it is an issue. It affects our economy and place. I think it perhaps is something that we might want to look at in the future.
We did have a discussion at our last meeting where we discussed the local transport plan, didn't we, about park and ride. Perhaps a more broad look into park and ride as a whole might be something we could discuss. Councillor Pearce and Senior Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't remember if it was us or CCSMC where we looked at the bus service improvement plan, but perhaps a bit of an update on that might be useful in the next sort of 3 to 6 months or so. Just a thought.
James, I'll let you come in and then I'll come to Councillor Douglas.
Sorry, was that me coming?
Yep, please.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, at the moment, bus service improvement plans are lodged with DFT and government, and we are, I wouldn't not sat on our hands, that's not the right phrase, but we are awaiting news, so which has been delayed at least once. So more than happy to provide you with an update, but I think it probably makes most sense once we hear from government, because at the moment there's not much more to say other than yes, we submitted it and took on board your comments.
Yeah, I wonder if it's time as well that we heard from bus operators about the health of the bus system, because national news at the moment is that they're still really struggling and how this might impact the city. So we fully understand that as well, and that could be done ahead of notification about the bus improvement plan, I imagine.
Yeah, that seems sensible to me as well. I just noting as well, I know our car park update is a very broad item at the moment on there. I just note as well, and I'm sure Councillor Tagorn is aware of my interest in this, perhaps as part of that, and I mention it here as a heads up to officers, some kind of update on residence parking's digitalisation rollout might be prescient and timely, perhaps. Councillor Hook.
Yes, something to combine everything, parking and park and ride, that having overnight parking at the parks and rides so that it means that people staying in hotels can leave their car at the park and ride and not clog up the city centre and all that sort of thing, or anyone else who wants to drink or put a space out and then cat a taxi home. So that sort of thing might be useful too. And also when we get Poppleton Bar back, just to speak parochially.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor de Gaulle.
Yeah, just on that one, I understand that is part of our BSIP bus improvement plan with some proposals about other ways in which the park and ride service could be more flexible, including things like overnight parking. In fact, there was a commitment pre-COVID for First to actually trial that in any case, but I don't think it happened because prior to COVID coming in and affecting everything.
So perhaps I could suggest, getting back to the work plan, that we discuss bus operators, a discussion with them about the health of the system as an item post April, and then a discussion of the bus improvement plan, whatever it's called, and to include a park and a ride discussion, as it seems those two are intrinsically tied, James. And then, but we do that when you are ready, because when the government has signed that.
Yeah, I think if you were looking at a sort of a bus-themed evening, which I'm sure you'd all look forward to, that could cover off hearing from bus operators, talking about BSIP, looking at park and ride and the challenges around that, would be good. Whether you'll still be having those sort of forum meetings, you may get more out of talking to bus operators semi-privately. Obviously, large parts of the network sort of operates at in commercial terms. So, I mean, it's your call, Chair, but you might want to talk to some of them in the background to ask them it's their, you know, it might be worth a discussion with them to see whether they'd prefer to do it sort of not in the public domain, or, you know, bring them in one by one to talk to you. Might be.
I wonder if, and this is I wonder if splitting, not having a bus, as fun as a bus themed evening sounds, that potentially, because of the way that operator thing is going to work, it would be useful to pull that out separately. And I've very presciently and well been reminded by officers that perhaps we could look at doing that as a commissioned slot in a conversation with Councillor Crawshaw as the chair of CSMC, because that would allow us to do that in a different way potentially, and talk to those operators in a different way. So perhaps we look at that separately and then hold off on the park and ride and bus, systems discussion when that's back from government and you're ready to talk about that, James. Okay, is that helpful and makes sense as a work plan discussion? Fantastic, thank you very much. I have no urgent business to discuss. So with that, a massive thank you to all officers involved, and of course to councillors for that, to our excellent IT system, and have a good evening.